It was the kind of rain that didn't just fall, it sank into your bones. Cold, constant, and quiet, like the world itself had given up. That's what it felt like to Henry Dawson as he sat in his car, staring at the faded brick building behind him. His windshield wipers squeaked back and forth, pushing away the mist, but not the words still ringing in his ears. "We appreciate your time, Mr. Dawson, but we've decided to move forward with another candidate." It was the 100th time he'd heard some version of that sentence. He'd stopped counting at 50, but his daughter Rachel kept track. She was good with numbers. Said it helped her make sense of things, gave her something solid to hold on to. Henry, well, he hadn't felt solid in years. 61 years old. Veteran. Former machinist. Widower. Laid off 4 years ago when the factory shut down. Not a man companies fought over anymore. These days, he walked into interviews with iron slacks and trembling hope, only to walk out with less than he went in with. He reached into the glove box and pulled out an old photo. His wife, Grace, smiling on the porch in her favorite sunflower dress. She'd always believed in him, even when he stopped believing in himself. "Guess I struck out again, babe," he whispered, his voice cracking. Outside, the rain didn't care. And inside, Henry Dawson stared out at nothing, wondering if this slow, invisible unraveling, was all that was left. The clock in the kitchen ticked louder these days. It was one of those retro ones from the 70s, with a big round face and numbers you could read from across the room. Grace had loved that clock. She said it made the house feel alive. Now it just echoed, counting off the hours Henry couldn't fill. He sat at the table with a cup of instant coffee that had gone cold, watching the second-hand circle over and over. On the wall beside him hung a fading calendar from the local hardware store, July 2023, still showing April. Time had stopped somewhere, and Henry had forgotten to catch up. From the living room came the muffled voice of a TV infomercial. Something about reverse mortgages and silver supplements. He didn't bother turning it off. Silence was worse. It reminded him too much of the way the house sounded after Grace passed. Her slippers still sat by the door, like she might walk in any moment. A creak came from the hallway. "Rachel." "Dad?" she called softly. He turned. His daughter stood there in her scrubs, exhausted from another long night at the assisted living home. Hair tied back, eyes rimmed with worry. "I made you some toast," she said, placing a plate in front of him. "You didn't eat dinner last night." He managed a smile. "You don't have to take care of me like this, kiddo." "I know," she replied. "But I want to." And in that quiet, Henry realized he wasn't the only one fighting to hold things together. That afternoon, Henry found himself in the basement, where the air always smelled faintly of cedar and old dreams. It was where he used to tinker. Grace called it his thinking room. After she passed, it had turned into more of a storage closet for memories too heavy to carry upstairs. He ran his hand along the old workbench, dust clinging to his fingers like time itself. Tools still hung on the pegboard, neatly labeled, just like he'd kept them when he worked at the factory. For a moment, he could almost hear the buzz of machinery, the hum of camaraderie, the clink of thermos caps at lunch break. That job had given him purpose. He opened a drawer and found an old black ledger. The kind accountants used before everything went digital. Inside were pages of ideas he had once scribbled down, business names, sketches, workshop plans. Half-baked dreams from a time when he believed he still had time. One page caught his eye. Dawson Custom Repairs. Underneath, for what's worn but worth saving. He laughed under his breath. It sounded ridiculous now. Who would trust an old man with arthritis and a worn resume to fix anything? Still, he sat on the stool, thumbing through the book like it was a photo album. So many ideas, none of them ever tried. Life had a way of convincing you to wait. And then one day you wake up, and you're 61, wondering why you listened. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was Grace's voice, still echoing in his heart. But something stirred in Henry Dawson that hadn't moved in years. That evening, while sorting through a box labeled Miscellaneous dad stuff. Henry found an envelope buried beneath a stack of Veterans Affairs forms and tax documents. Yellowed at the edges. Addressed in blocky handwriting that he hadn't seen in decades. Tom Garrett. The name jumped out like a fire alarm in a church. Tom had been his best friend during the war. They met in Nam, two scared kids thrown into a nightmare. Tom was the loud one, always cracking jokes, always keeping Henry grounded when things got dark. They lost touch sometime in the mid-90s, after life pulled them in different directions. Hands trembling, Henry opened the envelope. "Hank, if you're reading this, I probably croaked before we ever got to grab that beer I promised you in '72. Sorry about that. Life gets messy. But I never forgot you, brother. Never will. You remember that thing we used to talk about? Starting a little repair shop after the war? Fix what the world breaks, that's what you said. Well, I did it. Small town in Kansas. Didn't make much, but I helped a lot of folks, and it felt good. Really good. If you're ever lost, start fixing things. It's what we were born to do. Love ya. Tom." Henry sat there, eyes full, the letter clutched to his chest. Fix what the world breaks. The phrase echoed in his heart, deeper than the noise of the TV upstairs or the clock on the wall. It didn't matter if it sounded foolish. It mattered that someone believed it mattered. That he had once. For the first time in years, Henry Dawson felt less like a ghost in his own home, and more like a man who still had something left to give. The next morning, Henry pulled the tarp off his old toolbox. It hadn't seen daylight in nearly a decade, but the tools still felt familiar in his hands, like shaking hands with an old friend you never really stopped loving. He didn't start big. Just the broken kitchen chair that had been wobbling for years. Rachel had nearly fallen off it last week, laughing it off while balancing a plate of meatloaf. But Henry had noticed. That quiet wince in her back when she thought he wasn't looking. So, he brought it down to the basement and got to work. The smell of sawdust, the scrape of sandpaper, the creak of old wood bending to his will, it was comforting. Meditative. Like praying with your hands. By the time Rachel got home from her shift, the chair stood proud again, solid as the day he bought it. She blinked when she saw it. "You fixed it?" He just shrugged. "Didn't want you landing on the floor next time you tried to eat your dinner." She smiled, genuinely. Not the tired kind she wore for everyone else. "You should fix things for other people, Dad," she said. "You're good at it." Henry waved it off. "People don't need a tired old man doing handyman work. They hire contractors now." Rachel looked at him, really looked at him. "Not everyone wants cheap. Some folks want things done with care." That night, Henry couldn't sleep. Not because of the usual ache in his knees, but because something inside him felt alive again. Like a flame he thought had burned out was quietly flickering back to life. Maybe Rachel was right. Maybe care was enough to start with. The next day, Henry stood outside the local hardware store, a single paper flyer trembling in his hand. He'd stayed up half the night designing it, if you could call scribbling with a Sharpie on printer paper. Designing. But there it was. Henry Dawson, Fixes with Heart. Small repairs, big care. Free for seniors and veterans. Call or knock, 19 Maple Street. Tools, time and trust included. He felt ridiculous. At his age, starting something from scratch felt like trying to plant a tree in frozen ground. But Tom's words echoed in his chest. "If you're ever lost, start fixing things." He pinned the flyer to the corkboard outside the store, next to a notice about a lost cat and a church bake sale. "Henry?" A voice behind him. He turned to see Walt Zimmer, his old union buddy from the plant. Walt was hunched now, with a cane and a belly that spoke of too many retirement potlucks. "I haven't seen you in years," Walt said, eyeing the flyer. "You really fixin' things again?" "Trying to," Henry said. "Might be too late to start, but figure I'd rather be useful than invisible." Walt chuckled. "Heck, I've got a screen door that's been flapping like a loose tooth since last summer. My wife's been on me to fix it. Maybe I'll let you give it a go." Henry's smile was small, but it was real. By the time he got home, 3 tear-off tabs were missing from the flyer. 3. That night, he stared at the phone, hopeful and terrified at the same time. And then, just before midnight, it rang. The first call came from a shaky voice that reminded Henry of soft sweaters and Sunday potlucks. "Hello? Is this Henry Dawson? The fixer?" "Yes, ma'am," he said, surprised by how calm he sounded. "This is Betty Delaney. You probably don't remember me, but I used to teach piano down at Oak Street Elementary. My doorbell hasn't worked since Bill passed in 2009. I've been waiting for someone who'd take the time." "You said you fixed things with Hart?" Henry smiled. "Yes, ma'am. I do." Mrs. Delaney lived just a few blocks away, in a little white house with lace curtains and hydrangeas that had seen better days. She answered the door with a walker and a pink cardigan that matched her lipstick. "I don't get many visitors these days," she said, as Henry stepped inside. "Feels nice, having a man in the house again. Even if it's just to fix the bell." He opened the old chime box and found the wire frayed and brittle. Took him all of 20 minutes. When he flipped the breaker and pressed the button, the bell gave a sweet, musical ding-dong, like the house had taken a breath it forgot it needed. Mrs. Delaney's eyes welled up. "You have no idea how lonely silence can be," she whispered. Henry nodded. "I think I do." She insisted on paying, but he refused. "You already paid," he said, "when you taught kids how to find beauty in sound." As he walked back home in the cool evening light, Henry felt something shift. Not just in his bones, but in the world around him. Maybe he wasn't just fixing things. Maybe he was helping people feel seen again. A week later, Henry's name was on more than just a hardware store bulletin board. Word had spread the old-fashioned way, through church whispers, morning diners, and the echoing grapevine of small-town America. It wasn't fast, but it was faithful. That's how he ended up standing outside Denny's barbershop on a Thursday morning, staring at a cracked display window with a jagged line running across the glass like an old scar. The place hadn't changed since the 80s, green leather chairs, a stack of Field and Stream magazines, and Denny himself still trimming hair with more pride than precision. "Henry Dawson," Denny said, stepping outside with a towel over one shoulder. "You really are back from the dead." Henry laughed. "Still got some spirit left. Rachel says I need to put it to good use." Denny gestured to the window. "You think you can patch that crack? Can't afford a full replacement, and the cold's coming through it." "Let me take a look," Henry said, pulling a roll of clear epoxy from his satchel. "Might not be perfect, but it'll hold." As he worked, he heard Denny telling a customer about the old days. About how Henry once rebuilt an engine with nothing but elbow grease and a borrowed manual. About Grace's famous banana bread and how they danced under the stars at the 4th of July picnic in '79. "You ever miss her?" the customer asked. Henry, still outside, paused his hand. "Every day," Denny replied, voice soft. "But you know what? Fixing things, it's his way of talking to her, I think." Henry pressed the last strip of tape across the seal, eyes stinging, not from the wind. That night, 3 more calls came in. Late one evening, Henry found Rachel sitting alone at the kitchen table, head in her hands. Her nurse's badge still clung to her shirt, and her lunch, untouched, sat on the counter, long gone cold. The TV hummed in the background, some sitcom laugh track filling the silence like it was scared of the quiet. He sat down beside her. "Tough shift?" She didn't answer right away. Then, slowly, she looked up, and the tears came without warning. Henry stiffened, unsure. It had been a long time since he'd seen his daughter cry like that. Rachel had always been the strong one. She nursed her mother through chemo, worked 2 jobs after Henry got laid off, and never once asked for anything in return. "I lost a patient today," she whispered. "Mrs. Carruthers. She reminded me of Mom. Kind, sweet, and scared to die alone. I sat with her till the end, but it wasn't enough." Henry reached out, gently covering her hand with his. It was callous from the tools again, but warm. Steady. You did more than most ever would, he said. You were there. That matters. Rachel shook her head. Sometimes I wonder if any of it makes a difference. I come home, and everything still feels broken. Henry thought about that. About how for years he'd felt the same. But something had changed, slowly, like the light returning after a storm. He stood and pulled something from his pocket. It was a small wooden music box, one he'd repaired just that morning for a woman at church who hadn't heard its tunes since 1973. He turned the crank, and soft notes filled the room. Rachel's eyes lit up. Henry smiled. Sometimes the smallest things help people feel whole again. She didn't say anything, but she leaned into him. And for the first time in a long time, they sat together, not as caretaker and burden, but as family, quietly healing. It wasn't long before Henry's little project caught the attention of the town council. A quiet man with a worn toolbox fixing doorbells and patching windows wasn't exactly the headline they were used to, but it was the kind of story that made people sit up and take notice. One chilly evening, Henry found himself sitting in the cramped town hall, surrounded by familiar faces from church, the diner, and the old factory. The mayor, a sharp woman named Linda Hayes, called the meeting to order. Henry Dawson has been quietly helping our senior citizens and veterans with small repairs, she announced, smiling warmly. His work reminds us what community is really about: kindness, care, and second chances. Henry felt his cheeks flush. He wasn't used to this kind of attention. But when the mayor handed him a small certificate recognizing his community service and dedication, something deep inside him swelled. Afterward, a few folks approached him with thanks and stories of how he'd fixed their broken things, and in doing so, helped them feel a little less forgotten. Old Mr. Jenkins, who hadn't left his house in years, gripped Henry's hand and said, "You gave me hope when I thought there was none left." Henry looked around the room, at the faces weathered by time but bright with gratitude. He realized that his failures, his struggles, they hadn't been the end. They were the beginning of something new. And for the first time in a long while, Henry Dawson felt like he belonged. Late one night, after the town hall meeting and the slow buzz of celebration had faded, Henry sat alone on the porch swing. The air was thick with summer's warmth, crickets chirping in the dark. His hands gripped the worn wood, the same wood Grace had once rested her head against as they talked about dreams they never thought possible. "Grace," he whispered into the quiet. "I'm trying. I'm really trying." He thought about the years they'd shared, from the days of dancing barefoot at the county fair in '68 to quiet Sunday mornings with coffee and the newspaper. Grace had been his anchor, his best friend, the light that guided him through every storm. But after she was gone, the world felt colder, emptier. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves, and Henry imagined her smile. Not the sadness that sometimes crept in when he was alone, but the hope. He promised her then and there that he wouldn't give up, that he'd live for both of them. Because sometimes, love is the force that keeps you moving forward, even when the road is rough and the nights are long. And as he looked up at the stars, Henry felt a quiet peace settle in his chest, like Grace was right there beside him, whispering, "You've got this." One crisp autumn morning, Henry received an unexpected visitor. The doorbell he had fixed a few weeks earlier rang sharply, and when he opened the door, standing there was a man in his early 40s, sharp suit, polished shoes, and a kind smile. "Mr. Dawson? I'm Michael Rivera. I run the local community center." Henry blinked. The community center was the hub for seniors and veterans, a place Rachel often volunteered. "I've heard about your work. The care you put into each job. It's making a difference." Michael reached into his briefcase and pulled out a proposal, an idea to partner with Henry, to help fund a small workshop where veterans and seniors could learn to fix and build things together. A place to share skills, stories, and healing. Henry felt a lump in his throat. "Me? I'm just a handyman," he said quietly. Michael smiled warmly. "You're more than that. You're a symbol of second chances. And sometimes, that's exactly what a community needs." For the first time in a long time, Henry saw a future that stretched beyond his basement, beyond his solitary repairs. Maybe this was the next chapter. A new way to fix what had been broken, not just in things, but in people. As the workshop project began to take shape, Henry found himself surrounded by faces both familiar and new, veterans with haunted eyes, retirees nursing aching joints, and young volunteers eager to learn from the man who'd become a local legend. But not every day was easy. One afternoon, a young veteran named Marcus arrived, carrying a shattered toolbox and a story heavier than the tools themselves. He'd come back from service with scars no one could see, battling demons Henry knew all too well. "Why bother trying to fix stuff?" Marcus asked one day, frustration boiling over as a plank of wood cracked under his grip. "Feels like everything around me's broken, and I can't fix myself." Henry looked at him, memories flooding back, the endless nights in Nam, the silence after the firefights, the emptiness left behind. "You can't fix everything at once," Henry said softly. "Sometimes, all you can do is take one step. One nail. One screw. And maybe, that's enough to start." Marcus nodded slowly, the first crack in his armor. At home, Henry still struggled with the ghosts of his past, the weight of lost years. But the workshop taught him the power of patience, both with others and himself. To fix something, sometimes you have to let it break first. To rebuild, you have to be willing to start again. Henry's 62nd birthday arrived quietly, much like any other day, but this time, there was a subtle difference. The house wasn't empty. The phone didn't ring with silence. And for the first time in years, Henry didn't feel the familiar ache of loneliness pressing down on him. That afternoon, Rachel surprised him with a small gathering in the backyard, just a handful of neighbors, workshop friends, and even Walt and Denny from the barbershop. A homemade banner hung between two oak trees, fluttering gently in the summer breeze. "Happy birthday, Dad," Rachel said, her eyes shining. Henry looked around at the faces, some weathered, some new, but all smiling with genuine warmth. Walt raised a glass. "To Henry Dawson, the man who refused to quit, who reminded us all that it's never too late to start over." Denny nodded. "And to fixing what's broken, whether it's a door, a chair, or a heart." Henry felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. Grace's favorite song played softly from the porch speaker, and Henry swayed a little to the music, remembering dances long ago. That night, as the party wound down and the stars appeared, Henry felt something he hadn't in a long time: hope. Not just for tomorrow, but for all the tomorrows after. Just as autumn's colors began to fade, a knock came at Henry's door. He opened it to find a man he hadn't seen in over 30 years, Jim Carver, an old co-worker from the factory days. "Henry Dawson," Jim said with a grin. "Thought you might be the last guy in town who still remembers how to fix things the right way." Jim had been one of those people who once made Henry feel invisible, the kind who climbed the ladder faster, leaving others behind. Yet, here he was, weathered and worn himself, seeking something Henry had quietly built: respect, trust, and purpose. "I heard about your work," Jim said, stepping inside. "Look, I need help. My workshop's a wreck, and I'm about ready to give up." Henry hesitated, memories of old resentment flickering. But then he saw the fatigue in Jim's eyes, the same weariness Henry knew all too well. "Let's take a look," Henry said, grabbing his toolbox. As they worked side by side, the years melted away. Stories of the old days mingled with laughter, apologies unspoken but understood. By the time the lights dimmed, a fragile friendship had begun to mend. Sometimes, second chances aren't just for ourselves, they're for the people we least expect. A cold November night brought more than just gusting winds to Henry's small town. The storm rolled in fast, rattling windows and sending branches scraping against roofs. Power flickered, then went out entirely. Henry sat on his porch, wrapped in an old army blanket, listening to the roar of the tempest. He thought of Grace, how she always said storms don't last forever, and of the people he'd come to care for in the community. The phone lines were dead. The streets were dark. That's when the knocks started. First came Mrs. Delaney, holding her walker, shivering but determined. "Henry, the heater's out. Can you help?" Then Walt, his cane tapping urgently. "My roof's leaking like a sieve." One by one, neighbors braved the storm, finding refuge and help in Henry's small house. Together, they worked by candlelight, fixing heaters, patching windows, sharing stories and quiet laughter over warm mugs of coffee. The storm raged outside, but inside, something else was building, a bond stronger than wind or rain. That night, Henry understood what family truly meant, not just the ones you're born with, but the ones you choose to stand with, come hell or high water. One quiet evening, Henry sat at his old oak desk, a worn leather journal open before him. The house was still, except for the soft ticking of the clock and the distant hum of crickets outside the window. He pulled out a pen, fingers trembling slightly, and began to write. "Dear Grace, it's been so long since I put words to paper, but tonight I feel the need to tell you everything, the regrets, the hopes, the things I never said out loud. I know I failed you in many ways. The years I spent lost, chasing shadows of who I thought I should be, instead of who I am. But through the darkness, I've found light again. This little workshop, the people I help, it's more than just fixing broken things. It's healing, Grace. For me. For them. I wish you could see it. I wish you were here to laugh at my crooked hammer swings and stubborn spirit. I miss you every day. Thank you for loving me. I'm trying, Grace. For both of us." Henry closed the journal, eyes moist but steady. It was the first letter he'd written in years, not to be sent, but to keep. A promise to himself and to the woman who'd always been his guiding star. Spring had settled over the town, painting the streets with blooms and fresh hope. Henry's workshop was busier than ever, filled with the laughter of seniors and veterans sharing stories, and the curious chatter of young volunteers eager to learn. One afternoon, Rachel brought over her granddaughter, Emily, a shy, curious 10-year-old with bright eyes and a wild imagination. "Grandpa, can I help?" Emily asked, holding up a wobbly wooden birdhouse she'd found in the attic. Henry smiled, ruffling her hair. "Of course, kiddo. Let's make it strong enough to weather a storm." As they worked together, hammering nails and sanding rough edges, Emily's laughter filled the room, a sweet reminder of the cycles of life and the power of connection. Henry watched her, thinking about the decades behind him, the struggles, the losses, the small victories, and felt a deep sense of peace. Maybe the greatest legacy isn't the things you build, but the lives you touch and the love you pass on. The years rolled on, and Henry felt the weight of time more keenly now. His hands, once steady and strong, trembled a little more with each sunrise. The workshop that had breathed new life into him was now a cherished community treasure, buzzing with activity and love. One crisp fall afternoon, surrounded by friends and family, Henry announced that he would be stepping back from the daily work. The decision wasn't easy, but he knew the time had come to let others carry the torch. Rachel squeezed his hand gently. "You've given so much, Dad. We're proud of you." The community gathered, sharing stories of how Henry's kindness and resilience had changed their lives. Old friends, young volunteers, veterans, and neighbors all spoke with gratitude and admiration. As Henry looked around the room, a warm glow filled his heart. The failures, the loneliness, the second chances, they all led to this moment. He smiled softly and said, "It's never too late to start over. To fix what's broken, not just in things, but in ourselves." And with that, Henry Dawson passed the hammer to the next generation, his legacy etched not just in wood and nails, but in the hearts of those he'd touched. Years later, the little workshop still stood at 19 Maple Street, a beacon of hope in the heart of town. On a warm summer afternoon, a small group gathered outside, some familiar faces, some new. Among them was a woman in her late 20s, carrying a toolbox with a carefully wrapped bundle inside. She stepped forward and smiled. "Hi, I'm Emily," she said, "granddaughter of Henry Dawson." She unfolded the bundle to reveal a weathered, hand-carved wooden plaque. On it, carved with loving precision, were the words, "Fixer of Hearts and Homes." Emily raised the plaque high, and the crowd applauded, some with tears in their eyes. She turned to the crowd and said, "My grandfather taught me that life isn't about how many times you fall, but how many times you get back up. About kindness, sacrifice, and never giving up on people or yourself." A breeze rustled the leaves as if Henry himself were nodding in approval. In that moment, the town remembered a man who had failed 100 job interviews, lost much, but never lost hope. A man who started again, not for fame or fortune, but to heal and rebuild, one small repair at a time. Because sometimes, the greatest success comes not from what you build, but from what you mend. And that is the true measure of a life well lived.